Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I'm so excited today to bring you my guest, Dina Denham-Smith, who has written an amazing book along with her co-author called Emotionally Charged. We're going to learn a lot by this conversation about what could be happening for you in the workplace. So welcome to the show, Dina. I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Dina. I'm an executive coach. I work with senior leaders and teams at a number of premier companies that I'm sure you've heard of, like Adobe and Netflix, Goldman Sachs, Sephora, Stripe, a bunch of high growth startups. I was a former leader myself and have a background in organizational psychology. So I really blend the sort of the psychology with that first world experience to help leaders and teams just become the very best and highest performing version of themselves.
Amazing. Great companies that you've been working with there. Those are some big ones
Yeah.
for sure. So let's start with your book. I am really excited to hear a little bit more about why it was important for you to do it.
Okay. Well, first off, I must give credit where credit is due. I do have a co-author. Her name is Alicia Graham. I actually met her when we were both pursuing our PhDs in organizational psychology. So we're like long-term friends. And we're still friends after writing a book together, which is a super good outcome. But, what I noticed, because I'm always working with leaders and teams, is that over the last 5 years, there's honestly been this perfect disruption of the work world, like a perfect storm that has dramatically increased the emotional demands on leaders. And so there were a bunch of forces that came together really during the pandemic, things that had sort of been simmering along at a good pace in the work world, and the pandemic accelerated them. So things like the rise of digital communications. So sure, people are going back to the office, but we're still using Zoom and Teams more than we ever have before. Well, guess what? It is so much harder to read and convey emotion, build trust and solid relationships and culture from a distance versus in person. So that's just like one of the forces. We've seen the meteoric rise of artificial intelligence. Leaders are now charged with championing that while laying like job security fears amongst their people and wondering about their own relevance and obsolescence. We have an increasingly diverse and polarized workforce. So there is more tension, more conflict, more styles to adapt to when you're leading a team. And there's more, but nonetheless, all of these forces have come together really quite rapidly, dramatically increasing the demands on leaders in the emotional realm. And these are capacities that, sure, we've been talking about emotional intelligence for a long time, but what we're talking about is emotional demands. And how do you handle and navigate these new pressures? And so it was just really missing from the leadership space. There was nothing out there really talking about all the emotional labor that leaders need to do to perform in the current work world. And when you're performing emotional labor, you can either do it in a skilled way or in an unskilled way. And when you don't do it in a skilled way, there can be a ton of collateral damage to your own performance, to your relationships, professional and personal, as well as to your own health. And so it just felt like this gaping hole. And I have so much just empathy and compassion for the leaders that I work with. And I saw these strains and I just felt like something needs to be done. And so Alicia and I actually collaborated on an HBR article first, and it was called The Emotional Labor of Leading or Leadership, something like that. And it went pretty viral, and we just kind of knew. I was like, we're on to something here, because it finally gave people a word for what they were experiencing that they didn't have a name for it quite yet. And so the book really kind of like sprung from that. The whole goal was to plug that gap and give leaders specific, proven, like science-based, evidence-based strategies, techniques, tools that were both also practical that they could use to manage these new emotional demands, both the strains they feel personally, as well as some of the new interpersonal dynamics that they need to be navigating.
Wow. I mean, incredible that you saw this need and did a little research, wrote an article to find out if it was really going to land with people.
It wasn't like an A/B test. I just felt like the
Yeah.
article needed to exist, right? Because I was starting to see it. And so I reached out to Alicia, and she's studied emotional labor for years and years and years, but more largely in the kind of customer service context, because that's where it began. It actually, all the research on emotional labor began with flight attendants. Like, think
Oh,
about the
wow.
last time you were on a plane, right? And they're like, welcome aboard, welcome aboard.
Mhm.
I mean, really? They're not that happy to see you. Emotional labor is the work we do to produce the right feelings for the situation at work.
Yeah.
Well, flight attendants are supposed to act happy to see you, thankful when you leave and you've flown the
Right.
front skies or whatever, excited to bring you pretzels and a Coke. And that's emotional labor. Well, here's the crazy thing is leaders, it's now been studied, do just as much emotional labor as customer service people who have to deliver service with a smile. It just looks really different, but it's more complex. There's not a script to follow.
No. And no training for something like that. A lot of times you're thrown into a manager position because you were a good individual contributor. And
Yeah.
there is maybe a 3-day class. I think I got a 3-day class of how to be a manager, but of course did not include everything I could possibly need in there by any stretch of the imagination. So
No.
I was just talking to someone this morning, and so I'm really glad we're having this conversation because she was struggling. And what was interesting to me is she was taking everything that her leadership was sending down to her,
Hmm.
and she was holding on to it and not sharing any of it with her team.
Hmm.
So she was like this emotional buffer for both sides, right? And I said, that must be extremely difficult to
Yeah.
hold all of that. So I don't know, are you seeing where people are really trying to manage up and down the organization what they're feeling and dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, emotional labor, it manifests differently, kind of at like different levels of the organization. And I think about those middle layers as like the emotional shock absorbers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're getting it from above, they're getting it from below. One of the leaders that I interviewed for the book, we did a series of interviews. We did a relatively large scale survey. Like the book really is grounded in both like research as well as like all of my experience. But he said it best. He's like, for me, he's like, the empathy is like running in spades downhill, but it doesn't run uphill.
Mm-hmm.
I like very few people feel bad for their leader. I mean, I feel bad for them, but they really do. They end up taking it kind of from both sides, and so many leaders, at least the ones I work with, they're really well-meaning. They want to be great leaders, and so they actually oftentimes are trying to protect their team from some of that fallout.
Yeah.
Right? But then, like the woman you were talking with this morning, like it's all just landing inside her. And
Mm-hmm.
that can get really intense. It's an absolute strain. And so that is one of the ways in which emotional labor does show up in sort of those more middle levels, shows up in a bunch of other ways too, versus let's say closer to the top of the house where they're making decisions, often that impact real people's lives. So deciding that they yet again, because of something that's happened in the market, yet another strategic shift is critical. This means a large scale restructuring. They know people are super change fatigued. they know that this means like a department's going to get cut. That's also an emotional load. Deciding that, we need to like trim the ranks. Again, very few people like to hurt other people. And so there's an emotional strain that comes from making and implementing these kinds of decisions. And we actually dedicate a whole chapter to this notion that sometimes being a leader and doing something that is good for the collective good, well, you have to do something that actually harms an individual or a few individuals. How do you handle that? And we go into a whole specific technique called compassionate detachment that actually comes from the medical field. So there are broad strategies. There's sort of like specific like use case strategies that are available to leaders. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. If you have a leader, feel bad for them. If you are a leader, have self-compassion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everybody's dealing with stuff, right? Whether that's at work
Yeah.
or outside of work. And sometimes that comes in to the office, without intentionally doing it. But you're holding on to a lot of situations today in the world that are hard to navigate for anyone, no matter how much experience you have. It's just the unexpected can show up at any time.
Percent. And here's the thing, but you can't not bring it with you. Like our emotions are as integrated as our limbs. Like you can like lock them up a little bit. You can try to like shove your emotions in a corner. I'm like seriously good at that to a fault, even though I really understand all the science of emotions. Like, we learn how to compartmentalize, and that's kind of okay in like limited doses. But the thing is, like, we can leave our emotions at the door as much as we can leave like an arm or a leg. They are part of our body. They are part of our whole circuitry. And the thing is that when we don't acknowledge the emotions that we have, or when we're not like able to express them in any way, they come out sideways. You mentioned you were reading the book, so I don't know if you've gotten to the beach ball metaphor yet, but no. So trying to suppress your emotions, which is often the thing that we feel like we need to do at work, like emotional labor. Sometimes it's suppressing how we genuinely feel, and sometimes it's evoking things that we don't actually feel, right? So if you're in a really tough meeting and you swallow your frustration, you've suppressed it, right? If you're in a meeting and you're acting upbeat, even though you are like on fumes, you're evoking something you don't really feel. Well, suppressing emotions over time, it actually takes effort. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, right? Like you can do it,
Can't
right?
do it.
Like,
I mean, it's just hard, right? At some point.
It's hard. But like, I think with a little practice, you'll get a little bit better. But like, you can hold that beach ball underwater. But the problem with life is like another difficult situation comes along. And with that difficult situation, typically comes some difficult emotions. So boom, like now you're trying to submerge multiple beach balls. Well, guess what? Like inevitably, like those beach balls are going to pop up. They're going to pop up typically like at the worst time.
Right.
Right. And they typically pop up sideways and someone gets hurt. Like sometimes you get smacked in the face and sometimes somebody else. Like, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but like sometimes I'll have had a hard day at work, and you're just like getting through. And then I come home and I'm short with the very people I love the most. They've done nothing wrong. Right. Like they are an innocent bystander to like
yes,
emotions that I've not processed. And so anyhow, that's that whole beach ball thing.
Well, that's a great metaphor for that because so true. I just had an example yesterday. A leader made some comments about her group in front of a bunch of people and not very positive comments.
Absolutely. Right. And there's not one answer here, right? If let's just say typically that leader who spoke like that yesterday is this great person, right? Like sometimes I think we need to call on our like highest self and be like, I bet they were just having a terrible day. I'm going to let this go. right?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, they're so nice, they're this, that, and the other thing, right? Now, if this leader over time continues to devalue people and talk down, and it's really building up in this person, then she's facing a different choice point, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I could see it going a few ways. Like, one, do I believe the intentions are good and maybe they're unaware? Right. And then there's sort of like, well, do I actually have a conversation with them about this? And if so, how,
Yeah.
when, there's a lot to think about there. Do I decide I can't stand for this any longer and I need to work. So I'm going to start, looking for other opportunities on the side or trying to join another team at my company. The choice that over time can come back to bite her is if she just continues to like take it and let that fester,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because when we have all of those negative emotions in us and we don't somehow like process them or do something about the situation, we end up the only person who is hurt by them.
For many of us, it wasn't something we were taught how to deal with emotions. It's not
Mm-mm.
something you learned in school or anything.
Yeah.
And so, what are some things, of course, reading your book, but are there just some quick things that maybe you can share here that can help people process them? Because I think that's the one thing. They just deal with whatever happened, bury it, and then move on to the next thing. And they just kind of pile up after a while.
Yeah. 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 There's several things there. First off, I would say because you're so right. We are so kind of like untrained in like the language and the inquiry of emotions. Our entire school system is like neck up. And so we know how to think critically. We can spreadsheet with the best of them. Like we've got all of these cognitive skills that we've honed, but but then we've got this gap, right? When it comes to emotions. And because it feels like a gray area, right? We oftentimes like avoid it a little bit. The first thing I would say is, first off, emotions are information. That's what they fundamentally are. They're anything more sophisticated than that. They are like data points and they provide you with vital information about yourself and about others, right? Most of us have grown up with messages like, big girls don't cry, man up, don't be so sensitive, right? And so
Right.
we have taken on, for the large part, very unconsciously, this thought that emotions are weaknesses and should be pushed aside. We have corporate cultures that were defined like literally back in the 1930s, what professional is. And it was based on this white, like super male archetype. And so all of this like bounces around in our head and makes us think like, eek, right? Like, don't go there. But here's the thing, like emotions are information, they are data. And so now what do you do with information or data? You need to inquire into it, right? And so honestly, I think about emotions like messengers. So one way to kind of get into this is, and it's one of the things I'm actually talking about with this group tonight, is just like a short reflection, right? So after a difficult meeting, let's say, or a difficult day or difficult week or difficult stretch of time, pausing, like honestly, that's the hardest part of this because we're on this like reactive mode, pausing for just a few minutes and saying like, what am I feeling? Like, what am I feeling? And trying to come up with a few adjectives, right? Like, I feel frustrated and disappointed, right? Like, try to stay away from sad, mad, glad, because that's like, doesn't give you much, right? There's all sorts of sads and mads
Yeah.
and glads. And so try to get as specific as you can and then say, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Because our emotions provide us with clues about our values and our needs and our boundaries. And when we just take a beat and we name them and then we go, what are you really about? we can get all sorts of insight that can be really helpful. And even just thinking about your emotions as helpful actually yields performance benefits. So we know that leaders who think of emotions as helpful information as opposed to a hindrance are more creative, have higher performing teams, stronger teamwork, and more successful careers. Like just even shifting your mindset, like
Wow.
emotions aren't like scary, weird things to be over here on the side. It's data. And I'm gonna think about it as helpful and see what might be there for me can bring benefits. So
I love the reframe of that. I think that is so helpful. And I think because of the corporate, established norms, if you will, people don't want to talk about them. And,
oh,
God forbid someone get upset at the office, what's going on with that person. So I think there's a lot of past norms that are still in place. And I think your book can be a real good catalyst to start to change the conversation
yeah.
around
So,
emotions and dealing with them, and that they're data. It's not something to be hidden away, because eventually, the thing I think about is I've interviewed some people who have really high stress jobs,
yeah.
and what they talked about was how much they had buried and didn't realize that they were just keep going, right? And then they fall over or they have a heart attack. So I think we have to find ways to help people process and manage and have compassion for what everyone's dealing with, and not just assume the worst of someone as the first step.
100%. Like getting into this, I really feel so kind of compassionate around like the strains that people face, especially leaders in the work world, right? Because um, the demands are just so high. There's all these paradoxical expectations that exist these days around leaders, like, right? You need to be compassionate, but where are those results?
Right.
You need to honestly be just the right amount of human. We're celebrating authenticity, but then if leaders get too authentic, they're going to lose their credibility, right? Like it's a real like pressure cooker. And so even just like slowing down, like pausing to tune into your emotions feels like really inefficient, possibly impossible, right? You have to do anything you can to just stay afloat. But like you were saying, like when we continually just push them down and push them to the side and lock them up, like the outcomes are really, really significant over time. Like we all need to put on our game face or paint on a smile or grin and bear it every once in a while. No doubt about it. Like you just have to, and that's okay. And the problem is when we get into a pattern and, the consequences show up in all the places that matter most. So from a performance perspective, it's harder to build trust with people. We lash out more often at coworkers. We come home more tired because remember, like that beach ball, it's effort to like keep your emotions like really at bay, continuously. So we come home more fatigued. So we end up eating more compulsively. We drink more than we meant to, and we get in more fights like with our family. And then like the health outcomes are serious too, as you were starting to allude to. So we know that people who suppress their emotions over time suffer more physical pain. Like their back hurts more, not
Mm-hmm.
because physical issue, but like those emotions are literally like trapped and causing pain. They suffer more insomnia, depression, anxiety, and like you mentioned, even cardiovascular issues. So you can tell I'm on a little bit of a mission to try to not crack this.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you are. I think it's much needed for sure. Yeah, it's interesting to me to think about, let's bring in the visibility angle into this a little bit now.
Sure.
What are you seeing for people you're coaching or for companies that you're working with in terms of what is holding leaders back from being more visible? Is it any tie to emotion from what you did in your research?
Well, gosh, I think I'm going to answer that twice. um,
Okay.
From an emotion perspective, like the tone needs to be set at the top, right? When you work for a leader who shares how they're feeling genuinely. It makes it feel safe for you to do the same. And so honestly, I feel like it starts at the CEO, it moves down through the C-suite, right? Into SVP, VP levels. And then really, because the people at the top have the most leeway for showing different emotions. Like think about anger. You can get away with showing anger. Like the more power you have in an organization, the more you get away with it. If you are like I mean this just from a leveling perspective, lower level manager, you can't blow your top, right? Like, so power gives you a lot more leeway in terms of the emotions you show. And so like the lines get tighter and tighter and tighter that you need to walk. And it's especially true, of course, for women and people of color, even as they ascend. So from making emotions more visible, the easiest path is that it sort of starts at the top, because otherwise it can feel so hugely risky and vulnerable. But so there's that. From answering that question in a more general perspective, like what's holding people back from being more visible, I think there's a couple things, like a couple that relate to mindset and then something that relates to proximity. So from a mindset perspective, the idea that good work speaks for itself is so lovely, and I wish it were true, but it's magical thinking. Like we all need to claim our accomplishments, right? And it doesn't mean you're tooting your horn, but we need to enable others. We need to make visible what we have accomplished and what we are capable of. Like your manager does not have the bandwidth to actually pay attention to all of your greatness. Like, do not be the world's best kept secret, right? Like, it serves you not at all. And it doesn't actually serve your team or the organization as well, because then they are unable to tap into all that you could bring. And so, for people who are like, but good work should speak for itself, I'm like, yeah, that'd be really nice, right? But it doesn't. And I think the reframe that's most powerful there is to think about, most of these people, right? Like they're humble and they don't want to be that person who is like this blowhard, right? I'm like, you don't actually need to be that. Like you're keeping all your goodness a secret. Like it could be put to use, right? For good. And so thinking about the benefit that could come to others by enabling people to see your accomplishments and your skills and your strengths, is one thing that stands in the way. That initial mindset of good work should speak for itself. And the second thing is when people think about branding as like some superficial exercise, right? And for some it is, right? Like they are all sizzle and no steak. And that's blech, right? Like that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is clarifying, the value you bring and the impact you want to have in the world and communicating that so that those things can be put to great use. So branding is not about just like window dressing. It is about depth and substance and authenticity and purpose. So that's another thing. And then last but not least, when people are working remotely or hybrid, it does. And I'm sure you've talked about this on a bunch of shows over the last 5 years, so I will not belabor it. But you do need to up the efforts. It is a little bit out of sight, out of mind. And so finding ways to kind of amplify while still maintaining your humility, right? And not trying to like steal all airtime, nothing like that. But you need to highlight these things in other ways that maybe you wouldn't need to if you were in person full time with your leader and your team.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all that. All sizzle, no steak. I'm not going to forget that anytime soon.
I was like, that's a good one.
I love that. So that is all amazing. What happens when you are working for someone who is a strong, insecure leader, meaning that they don't trust too much? They are not helping you at all. How have you seen leaders navigate that when they're trying to be more visible, trying to influence, trying to have different conversations, and they're really held back by someone like that?
I have a leader and they're working for this other person who seems insecure. They don't provide feedback. They're not willing to like give that person sunlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I actually worked with with a situation just like this. It was a person who was partner track at one of the big four consulting firms, and he worked for this partner who was just the partner. I don't know if he didn't like him, if he treated everybody this way, but he was really getting in my client's way. And so some of the things that we purposefully did together is we focused on a couple things. One was really expanding his network at the firm, right? Like you need to start becoming visible to other people who have power and sway, who might sponsor you, or just, when they're having these big calibration meetings and everybody's in the room can say something kind on your behalf.
Yeah.
So really nurturing and deepening your network outside of, call it your functional silo, or, that can be hugely impactful. The second thing, and again, you need to be a little bit careful here, but starting to get involved in more cross-functional projects or joining the ERG or finding other ways within your company to like network and connect and show your skills. And then, of course, with your leader, still maintaining as positive a relationship as you can, being proactive, we could be like, oh, he doesn't like me, like, forget it, right? And just start to like avoid. That's not going to help you at all. So you can only need to push that thought out of your mind and be like, okay, I'm just going to do my very best here. Liking is actually this reciprocal process. When we like someone, they tend to like us back, right? So I always think about like, guess what? We can work this both ways here, right? Like I conjure in yourself, like, I like my boss. Like, what are the things I would do if I liked him? And, allowing some of those behaviors to emerge. And so, the good news is, in this particular case, very next year, he got promoted to partner using these strategies. So I've seen him work, not just in his case, but in other cases. And so those are a few ideas if you happen to find yourself in that same scenario.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I was coaching in the right direction. Then I did. I hadn't thought of the like one though, but I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really interesting. I always tried to think about compassion for that, but I think liking someone or not does change even just how you show up and talk to them. Your confidence, changes a little bit when you're in the room with someone like that than if you like them, right?
Yeah.
Simply just
Right.
like them.
Just find what you like about them, right? Like very few people are 100% detestable. Some are.
Yeah,
but most
there's
people,
some.
you can find things that you appreciate about them or you respect about them or ways in which you trust them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
Yeah.
try to focus on those aspects of that person as opposed to all the ways that in your mind, they don't measure up.
Yeah. I mean, it's really easy to go to a victim place and say, they're against me,
Mhm.
blame them for everything. Where I try to tell people, and I had to do for myself when I got the feedback I wasn't being visible, is there something here to look at? Is there
Yeah.
something I need to explore? And as soon as I did that, it helped me move past any blame that I was having for her. And so, I don't know, I think it's something we all have to face. There's certain feedback we're going to get, certain types of feedback we're going to get, I guess I would say, that we have to figure out if it's something we can do something with.
Yeah.
Or we let it go and we make
Yeah.
a choice to do that. So it's all those decisions along the way that we have to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I talk about that specific scenario, but I did write an article for HBR maybe a year, 2 years ago. And it's all about favoritism in the workplace and what to do when you're not the boss's favorite. And yeah. So you can go out and find that. And there's more strategies in there too.
Love that. Love that. I was just talking about favorites earlier on another call. So wow, you're hitting all the coaching calls I had this week. Love that. Any other things that you would share with the audience about visibility, just from your experience working with clients, of some things that you found worked well?
Yeah, I think there's some things that are kind of relatively like tactical in nature, and that's okay. Like not everything has to be some like enormous like paradigm shifting strategy, right? But oftentimes I find like especially the higher that you go, the less often you're having these regular one-on-ones, right? Because now, oh my goodness, like your boss has to go to Dubai this week. Like there
Mm-hmm.
goes that one-on-one. And so getting into a habit of like a weekly like update, right? Where these are the top things I'm working on. Here's the status and the wins. Here are the problems I'm currently solving. And if there's anything where you're like, I need you to do X, right? Some specific ask. And just getting in the habit, like every Friday, you shoot your leader a short, I mean short, update. And if I were you, I'd keep them all like in a Google Doc or something like that, because then when it comes time for your performance review and you're like, what did I do this year? Right? You literally
Got it.
have this year long of like all the things that you've accomplished. So that if you don't have quarterly career conversations with your leaders, like some companies, especially larger companies, that is like part of their overall like talent development strategies, like quarterly career touch bases. If that doesn't exist, I would start it. Right?
Yeah.
Because unless people know what it is you want to learn or try or tackle next, and nobody can read your mind, right? So I think a big part of being visible is being proactive. Nobody's going to pull this stuff out of you. And
Yes.
so there is a lot of proactivity. And don't think about it as like you're being arrogant and annoying and overly tooting your horn, right? Like you're just giving like sunlight to what is otherwise invisible and could help.
Right. Oh my gosh. I can't believe how much we've covered in such a short period of time. And I wish we could have another whole session about this, because I think there's been so many good nuggets that people are going to take away from this conversation about your book and about what you're seeing with visibility, a lot of what I'm seeing as well. So thank you for sharing all of that.
My
I
pleasure.
want to Of course. I want to transition into what I call the Rise Up and Be Visible quick tips. These are 4 questions that I ask every guest. The
Okay.
first one is, what do you think visibility is, and why do you think that?
I think visibility is enabling the value that you bring and the impact that you're having and can have. Visibility is enabling others to know that.
Love that. What are you doing to be visible?
The way that I do this is I do a lot of writing. That is a way that feels very authentic for me to share my expertise. So I've written a ton for Fast Company and Harvard Business Review and other publications, obviously this book. And then I proactively share that on LinkedIn, as well as other content that I feel is really valuable for the people that I care the most about, which is leaders. And so those are kind of like the 2 ways that I try to provide value, which is really important to me, right? Like I want to be the steak. I want to be the steak. And so that's how I try to show the steak to others.
I love this analogy we're carrying through. What is some career or leadership advice you received throughout your lifetime that was really helpful for you?
There's so many little like tidbits that I have collected over time that really influence like how I led and how I run my business and I coach. And I hope this doesn't feel dark after this lovely conversation, but like really, really early on, I had a leader who said this to me. He said, I've never fired anybody too soon. And what I have noticed over the course of my career is that's true. Typically there's something there that like really isn't working. I mean, by all means, try all the things, have the conversations, like do what you can. But none of us like to fire anybody, right? And so we oftentimes will like procrastinate on it or not do it and just tolerate something. The problem is it's impacting your team too. And guess what? It impacts that person because they are in the wrong on the tree, or they're in the wrong tree. Like I honestly think that like when there's someone who is not a good fit for a role, it does nobody any good to keep them there. And so I encourage all the compassion in the world. Like, it's hard on both sides. But I just feel as though there's too much collateral damage to a team when you have somebody who is really like dragging the performance of the team down. Um, and typically it means there's something better out there for them too. So
Right.
do the hard thing.
Yeah, that's how I've always viewed it too. But it
Yeah.
is not easy for sure.
It's not easy. And I wish
No.
I mean, I've got other tips too that are a little lighter, but anyhow, that's the one.
No, that's okay. That's one we haven't had, so that's a good thing. What is a book you would recommend to the audience?
I would recommend, I love this book, actually. I love books in general, but Deep Work by Cal Newport is a book that I really like, and it was written probably 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago, and I think it's all the more relevant now. And it's all about how deep work is when we're actually doing sort of the strategic, deep thinking, like the work that the needle that makes a difference. But it's really hard to do that these days with all the notifications and the emails and the Slacks and the this, that, and the other thing. And we really need to protect the time to do deep work. And I mean that no matter what level you are in an organization, right? Like the higher you go, the more important some of this like time to step back and think strategically gets. And I know your to-do list is 18 miles long. I get that. But this is the work that fits in that not urgent but critically important category of like the Eisenhower matrix, and you protect it with your life.
Yeah. I always tell them as you climb the ladder, your to-do list changes, right? It's not some of the things you can check off, but thinking, planning, being strategic become part of your to-do list. And you need to make sure that you're creating space and time for that. It just doesn't happen otherwise, right?
It will not happen.
Thanks so much for joining. I have really enjoyed this conversation so much. I feel like I've learned so much from your perspective, and it's really exciting for me to hear a lot of the things you're talking about because I talk about the same things. How can people find out more about you and your book if they want to find you online or wherever?
Thank you for the question. 2 places. My website, it's DinaDSmith.com. So DINAD as in Delta, Smith.com. While we're talking about airlines. And then, of course, LinkedIn, Dina Denham-Smith. So yeah, I would welcome any and all outreach. Love to get to connect.
Love that. Love that. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for the book that you've written, all the articles. I'm going to go find a couple of those articles that you talked about and put them in the notes because I think they would really resonate for people just based on our conversation today. And I love what you're doing. Keep doing it. Keep making magic happen out in the world for people, learning how to not only deal with their emotions and process them, but make it okay to talk about them. I think it's so important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again for giving me the chance to talk to you about it.
Of course. I loved it. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.